Hey, Sana. Hi. Thank you for making time for this episode. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Appreciate being here.
Yeah. So, to begin with today's episode, first is, of course, your introduction. If you would introduce yourself, that would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Sana Farouk, pronounced like the sun in the sky, and I've been in customer success and operations for well over 12 years now at early stage and high growth companies, everywhere from C to Series D. And most recently, I was overseeing inaugural enablement and customer education divisions.
Okay.
But I've worn virtually every single hat in customer success at this point. You know, everything from CSM to support to ops to leading large scale customer success teams. It's a pleasure to kind of talk about how all of these intersect and different ways of working together.
Great. Perfect. And since you have so much of background in customer education, primarily focused there, so we'll keep today's episode focused, centered around how customer education is going to help customer success team excel. So we'll open the floor for questions. So the first in the series is, of course, around customer education. That how can customer success managers, and if they have a support team, collaborate with education teams or training teams to create or maintain the content? And in turn, when they're doing it, how is this going to help the team?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first and foremost, it is also really important to define what customer education is, and I think a lot of different organizations may define it a little bit differently or may look at it a little bit differently. But essentially, what we're looking at is, how you can continue supporting customers after that initial purchase and provide ongoing materials throughout the customer lifecycle to help them continuously grow and get value from that product. And you're always really going to want to be able to use data to get ahead of where and how frequently customers may get stuck in the process from an education perspective. So kind of leading that into your other question. It's funny because I've always said that CS teams sit central to the business because they're able to touch so many different parts, different departments with their knowledge of the customer. But the education team really sits central to the customer success team, right? And so leaning into that can lead to some really strong, mutually beneficial outcomes, just as you suggested. On one side of the fence, education teams can rely on customer success managers and support teams as subject matter experts. They really hold the keys to where customers might be getting stuck in the process, what frequently asked questions they're getting, the outcomes that they're looking to achieve within the product, and then just general knowledge of how those applications are getting used. They can be a wealth of knowledge and information in that regard. As I said before, education teams should really be thinking 10 steps ahead of the customer and using data to get ahead of where or how frequently customers are getting stuck in the process. And customer success managers and support teams can be a really great resource for building out that longer term roadmap of education and training initiatives. And as a result, you can really be looking at lower support costs, higher engagement, feature usage, things like that. And then on the other side of the fence, there is a huge opportunity for CSMs, support teams, implementation teams as well, to rely on education teams in a much stronger way. As I mentioned, they hold the keys to the customer knowledge, but that information doesn't always flow so freely to other departments that could use that information, education being one of them. Right. So regular communication on the data that they're receiving, the common themes that would impact customer outcomes the most, is a great way for that to communicate information back to the education teams to define that needs analysis and that initial program strategy.
Right. I think the key takeaway that I take from the answer that you just mentioned is that not leaving data behind, even when it comes to training and education, making sure that all of your plans are centered and designed around the data that you have derived from the customers. Yeah, that's really helpful. So that brings me to the next question, Sana, that how does a proactive customer education program help customers in achieving their outcomes and also maybe at times receiving their ROI earlier? And if there's a way to do it, what strategies should be employed to ensure that customers are utilizing the full potential of the product?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. I think a really great example of that is the onboarding period. It's the most critical period in the customer journey. It's the first impression. Both parties are at their highest level of investment into the process, right? And so whatever budget and resources and headcount can be put towards making onboarding a faster and more efficient experience should always go there. And so pairing up with those implementation leads to understand what that journey looks like today, where education can be plugged into that process, and then what other training needs might be on the horizon in the future can get both teams that ROI that they're looking for while ultimately impacting a really important top line metric, like reaching a faster time to launch. And that really goes back to the topic of the customer journey that we touched upon a little bit as well. It's always critically important that we're looking at any program or initiative through the lens of customer outcomes and how teams can all work together to achieve that more quickly and efficiently for the customer. So if there isn't a customer journey or multiple customer journeys in place already, I would recommend starting there first and really mapping it all of it out. It's an internal resource, but those maps should include both internal milestones as well as external milestones of where you want your customer to achieve on their journey. It's different for every single organization based on their product and their business model and things like that, but it gives a really clear picture of what's actually going on and what expectations there should be at each stage of the process. And then from there, that last step is aligning that education strategy close to those customer outcomes, like adding gasoline to a fire, right? Anything that the CS organization is doing to take customers through the process, the education team should be right alongside them with those resources, those training materials as well, to kind of shepherd customers through that process as well.
Right. I think the important part that you mentioned, of course, everything leads to the answer that you have given is very complete in itself, but tying the outcomes that the customer is looking for in the training and not just having a very generic training, which is just bombarding your customers with all the features that you have. So I think that's important here. And the next question that I have is that how does integration of customer education affect key pain points, like you mentioned onboarding, or if there's change management happening or managing a turnover, how can that be structured when it comes to customer education?
Absolutely. So it's such a common problem, especially lately. So many industries have been impacted by things like the Great Resignation a few years ago, high turnover, layoffs have been a huge topic of many industries this year in particular. Resource reductions, right? There's always something kind of going on to provide that strain on resources. And it's created this kind of continuous, ever-boarding challenge. Burnout is getting worse by having to add that responsibility to their plate of training and onboarding new users onto their platforms, right? Thinking about this from the customer perspective. And your customers are going to be looking to you and your teams to help them solve that challenge. And so either way you look at it, SaaS teams are getting just as burned out as their customers are. And so looking to solve for that problem is what's key on both sides. So I think that's a really important thing to consider as part of the process is how can you help your customers onboard and train their own users at a much quicker rate, manage continuous onboarding of those teams, and making sure that if they're experiencing turnover, there's a resource for them in education-wise to help them facilitate that process a little bit smoother, and that provides great outcomes on both sides.
Right. I agree. And because you mentioned that there's a real burnout happening, so I wonder if having a playbook can make this process easier. Do you think playbooks have a part to play when it comes to customer education?
I think they absolutely do. I think playbooks are really synonymous with customer outcomes and, what kinds of impact you want to drive from an ROI perspective internally as well as externally. And so I think there absolutely is some synergy there between education strategy and playbooks.
Right. So continuing on the playbook front, how can businesses utilize playbooks to target customer education across all the stages, for example, onboarding or adoption, advocacy? And when we have those playbooks, what are some best practices when we are designing them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think targeting that education is a really critical piece of that overall customer education journey and strategy. You really want to be looking at, what problem are we solving for our customers? What do I want the customer to do? What does the customer want to do within the application, and kind of meeting in the middle on both sides. And then you combine that with, the challenges that I was sharing earlier about customers now need a way to continuously onboard regardless of time zones and schedules. They want to train their teams effectively to adopt the system on an ongoing basis. They do want to manage turnover, retraining of new hires, and then also getting return on investment with their technology earlier too, right? So there's a lot of different things at play in that landscape. So I think zooming out of that and looking at it from where on the customer journey does this fit, going back to that topic, and then how does each piece leverage customer education? And when you look at it from those four components, right, you have onboarding, you have adoption, you have support, and then you have expansion. Those four buckets are those playbooks that you can start building out more effectively. From proactive support, let's be predictive about where they might be getting stuck, to expansion and increasing the number of use cases for their usage. Those are great low-hanging fruit that you can look at it from a playbook perspective and look at the best practices for them achieving those outcomes within the lens of that overall customer journey. So I think it all kind of ties in together with those themes that we were chatting about a little bit earlier too.
I think it's important that we make sure that each stage has a different customer education playbook and not just have, like I mentioned earlier, one across the whole slab of it. This was a very helpful session, Sana. I think we have a lot of key takeaways from this discussion today. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.